Hello my friends and welcome back. Thank you very much for being with me again today. This piece of information that I have here comes from an Ukrainian source, and what's interesting is that it seemed to tell us of the Russian military achievements yesterday and today. So let's go over it. This article is from Ukrainska Pravda, and it's from today, which is the 25th of October 2020. This is the title. Russians are advancing on two fronts and preparing defensive positions in Kherson Oblast. So they are advancing, and it's unbelievable that the Ukrainians would report such a thing. Russian troops carried out 15 missile strikes on Ukraine over the past day. They are conducting offensive operations on the Bakhmut and Avdiivka fronts. The Russians are also setting up defensive positions by placing mines along the left bank of the Dnipro river in Kherson Oblast. The source is the General Staff of Armed Forces of Ukraine. And I'm quoting, "The enemy is trying to hold the temporarily occupied territories and improve their tactical positions, focusing on deterring the actions of the Ukrainian defense forces on certain fronts, and at the same time, it is conducting offensive actions on the Bakhmut and Avdiivka fronts. Over the past 24 hours, the Ukrainian defense forces repelled Russian attacks around the settlements of Bilohorivka, Luhansk Oblast, Bakhmut, Bilohorivka, Verksnikomainske, Ivanhrad, Klishchivka, Spirne, Soledar, Marinka, and Nevelske in Donetsk Oblast. The enemy is attacking the positions of our armed forces along the line of contact and conducting aerial reconnaissance." End quote. And details. Over the past day, the Russians launched missiles and airstrikes on the infrastructure and civilian homes in violation of international humanitarian law, here we know that, and the laws and customs of war. Unlike you, we got that one. The Russians carried out a total of 3 missile and 12 airstrikes during the previous day. They carried out more than 60 attacks from multiple launch rocket systems. Russian forces hit civilian infrastructure, obviously facilities in the settlement of, they give us here like 3 in Donetsk Oblast and in the city of Mykolaiv. The situation on the Volyn and Polisia fronts remains unchanged. There is a continuing threat of missile and air strikes on the critical infrastructure of Ukraine from the territory of Republic of Belarus. There also may include the use of Iranian-made attack UAVs. On other fronts, the Russians carried out attacks on the Sivershchinya front from mortars and tube artillery, on the Slobozhanshchinya front from tanks, mortars, tubes, and rocket artilleries, on the Kupiansk and Liman fronts from tanks and artillery on areas in and around settlements, and it's about 20 in Donetsk Oblast. The other one was in Kharkiv Oblast. So the first one, which was Sivershchinya, it's from Sumy Oblast. Slobozhanshchinya, that was from Kharkiv Oblast. Now the Kupiansk and Liman fronts are in Donetsk Oblast. And on the Bakhmut front, from tanks, mortars, tubes, and rocket artillery, and that is from Donetsk, area. On the Avdiivka front, from tanks and artillery on areas in and around the settlements, and give you 4 settlements. On the Novopavlivsk and Zaporozhye fronts, from tanks, mortars, tubed, and rocket artillery, and that is in Zaporozhye Oblast. And the last one is on the Pivdeny Bukh front. The Russians fired at more than 20 settlements near the line contact, and give you about 5 towns here. According to available information, the Russian invaders are setting up defensive positions on the left bank of the Dnipro River in Kherson Oblast. Thus, engineer and sapper units of the Russian occupier troops are placing mines along the bank near the settlement of Hornoskaivka, leaving small pathways for the possible retreat of their troops from the right bank. Evacuation of local residents from temporarily occupied Kherson is underway. The equipment and employees of all banks and the occupation administration have been evacuated from the right bank of the city to the settlements of Henishensk and Skadovsk. The equipment of internet providers was stolen. Emergency services and medical personnel are forcibly evacuated. These guys are just bad, man, bad. School funding and provision of food for children in school have been stopped. The cases of robberies of local residents and looting have increased. This is like the Second World War, man, like the Soviets then. Because, you know, anyway, recently conscripted Russian servicemen are being transferred to the settlement of Lvove to replace the evacuated collaborators. According to the updated information, 5 pieces of weapons and military equipment have been destroyed and up to 110 Russian occupiers have been killed in the Zaporozhye and Kherson Oblast in recent days. Ukrainian Air Force carried out more than 30 strikes during the past day. Where's that? Past day, Ukrainian Air Forces destroyed, shot down 3 Ka-52 Alligator helicopters, A-1 Sukhoi 24M bomber, 2 Orlan 10 UAVs, and A-1 Shahin 131 UAV of the occupiers on various fronts. So over the past day, rocket forces and artillery hit 6 clusters of manpower, weapons and military equipment, 2 ammunition storage points, an anti-aircraft missile systems, a Zupark-1 radar station, and 2 other important sites used by the Russian occupiers. Well, so what I got out of this is the same shelling from one another. The Russians are advancing on 2 fronts. And other fronts, they are repelled by the Ukrainian forces. The Ukrainian forces are still destroying air positions, and as you heard about, what, 30 missions or 20 air missions, 30 I think it was, destroyed helicopters, and the Russians are preparing defensive lines with mines across the Dnipro River on the east side. So that's all occurring over there. Obviously, looting and killing civilians goes without saying, because that's how the Russians are portrayed to be, and I don't know if that's so or not, and I wouldn't be surprised that's the first one. Why? Not because they are Russians, but because they're human, and that's what we do in this kind of circumstances. You don't think so? Okay. And then the same thing the Ukrainians probably do when they take over, if they take over certain areas they deoccupy. That means they're going to look for whomever and they will take care of, like the Soviets took care of after the Wehrmacht retreated and some people remained in Ukraine. Oh my, what they did with those guys, the Soviets. So anyway, why? Because when the Wehrmacht pushed the Soviet army back, collaborators with the Wehrmacht took care of people who took care of them before the Wehrmacht came over, and those collaborators, that the people under Wehrmacht's protection were certain people who were riding high on Soviet Union. So when they got smacked in the mouth, finally, then when the Soviets brought them back, these guys started smacking them. But you have only monuments for the first ones being massacred, but not for the second ones being massacred by the first ones who massacred him in the first place. It's anyway. This is how history is written. So yeah, this is the situation over here. The Russians are still trying to advance, and a lot of missiles, rockets, mortars, tanks, shelling. Thank you very much for being with me again today. Stay strong, stay smart, look for the truth, and be just.